there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we're going to do a portrait of June from The Handmaid's Tale. I absolutely love this show, and I just binge watched season 3. Oh, what a great show. I was inspired to do some fan art, and I don't think I've ever done that before, at least not since I was a kid. So I'm starting off sketching on some toned tan Strathmore mixed media paper with a coal erase pencil. I'm using, I believe this is terracotta. It's just kind of like a rusty red color, and I'm trying to get the shape of her face, also the round of her back where you're kind of looking down at her and she's kind of like peering up with this intense look on her face, this intense look in her eyes, and that's what I wanted to really capture because that really I feel like embodied the character of June this season in The Handmaid's Tale. She was just so fierce and just crazy. It was such a great season. I highly recommend that show, although the show is not for the faint of heart. It is not for children, and it is a little bit tough to watch at times. So if you have delicate sensibilities, it might not be the show for you. Definitely watch maybe a preview or something first. I don't want anyone to watch it and be like, oh wow, why did you recommend that? That's an awful show. But I thoroughly enjoyed this dystopian type of film or television show. Actually, it's on Hulu, by the way. And if you would like to see a real-time demonstration of this narrated, that will be in Critique Club in a couple of days. It's over 2 hours long. It's going to take a little bit to get the files managed and uploaded, but you can look for that in a couple of days. There's also a new prompt up in Critique Club. If you haven't visited yet this month, there is a mini lesson on values, and hopefully that will help you guys out. I really wanted to get this. She has a very unique shaped nose. She's got a little bump on. It's actually kind of similar to my nose, which I never liked, but on her it looks great. So I wanted to get that kind of bump on her nose, and also this foreshortened angle where she's looking slightly up. It really accentuates the shape of her chin and her nose, so I wanted to make sure that I didn't idealize that shape too much, because I know we kind of want dainty little noses and dainty little chins, and I really wanted this portrait to look visceral and real. And the thing I really like about this actress, she doesn't wear makeup in this series, and it's her performances are so intense and so raw, and I just really love how they kept to that kind of realness in the show. So I really wanted to get this kind of warts and all, and there's no real warts, but you know what I mean. I wanted to make it real. And so by sketching with this light colored pencil, I know that my lines will just kind of disappear as I work over it with alcohol markers. And I'm also going to redefine some of the lines a bit with a darker pencil in a moment. I have to say, it's really fun to look back at the sketching process here, because I typically just kind of sketch and I don't try to narrate while I'm doing like I did with this one. And you kind of forget the stages that a picture goes through. I think it would be a great exercise for anyone to kind of film themselves sketching once in a while and then look back at it, kind of like an athlete would replay their golf swing or their basketball hoop shooting or something like that, just to kind of see what your technique is. And you might spot something that you've done wrong or done right. And I think it's just kind of interesting. So I'm always interested with these Sketchbook Sundays, just to look back and see how I did that. And I was really struggling with the drawing, and I was really kind of fussing with it. That's why I'm drawing upside down, because I was feeling like I wasn't getting the eyes right. Something was just wrong with the portrait. So I flipped it upside down, grabbed a darker pencil, and just took another run at it. And if you just go on, whatever internet browser you have, whatever search engine you like, and you type Handmaid's Tale portrait June or picture June, this photo will come up. The real photo that I'm drawing from. It's got a black background, and it's kind of one of the iconic photos from this season, just very intense looking. But if you're not familiar with this character, you can, check it out. But anyway, so what I did was I just flipped the picture on my computer screen so I could look at it upside down. And for me, that's just a really good tool to draw what I see and not what I think I see. And I get really hung up on portraits. I have a very difficult time getting a likeness. Now I can draw a face, it looks like a face just fine, but to get a likeness, I really struggle with that because I'm out of practice. I don't have a lot of practice doing that. And so by drawing upside down, it really helped. And I also have nice dark lines now from that, using that Tuscan red, I believe. Whichever one's darker, terracotta or Tuscan red, I used them both. I started with a lighter one and went to the darker one. So now what I'm doing is starting in with my alcohol markers, and I picked a really, really pale yellow yellow for the highlights. And the reason of that is that there was warm light. And if you watch the show, it's very dark. And the lighting is usually, it depends. Sometimes you get a warm lighting if you're, like if it's an interior of a scene. Oftentimes you get this almost desaturated, cool look. It's almost uncomfortable. It just feels cold. But in this picture, the lighting was warm. So I went in with a really pale yellow to do the warmer highlights, the lighter highlights rather, and then I went in with a darker color to get these darker shadows. I personally like to do either my highlights first or my dark shadows first. I try not to mess with the midtones until I've got those in, because you can really muck around in the midtones for way too long, spend a lot of time, not advance your drawing. It's almost like I feel like playing with midtones is kind of like procrastinating the hard stuff, and I would rather mess up on a picture first thing than, you know, work on layering all these midtones or layering up light and midtones and then darks and then mess up at the end. You know, I want to get those darks and shadows out of the way. If I mess it up, then I haven't wasted that much time. Now, something I probably should have done was actually sketch this on tracing paper or a copy paper and then traced it onto my good art paper, because if I did mess it up, then I wouldn't want to have to redraw the whole thing. And if you're weak at drawing but you still want to do this, you can always trace the photo, print out the photo and trace it. The drawing is, I feel like the drawing is one part of the art and the painting is another part of the art. It's almost like the drawing, it's hard. I had an instructor once that told me the drawing is the art, the painting is the craft. And I can kind of get that. You know, they're two separate things. You know, you can never learn how to draw and be a beautiful painter, and you could draw and never want to paint. It's definitely two separate things. Kind of like using art supplies and buying art supplies are two entirely different hobbies. You can do both of them, or you can do one of them. But anyways, I was having a lot of fun with this. Now I'm going in with the midtones, and I chose kind of like a peachy color, kind of a midtone peach Caucasian skin tone here, on the light side, but light to medium tone, because she is very fair. So the shadows are super dark, or not super dark, but they're quite dark. I like to do the midtones over the shadows because I can blend out a little bit when I do the midtones. Now, I didn't really use a lot of blending techniques with this. I honestly find that I'm using less and less blending techniques the more I use alcohol markers. The more I'm using alcohol markers, the more I am doing layering, maybe just a little bit of blending at the edges, but I'm definitely not doing the blending that I really tend to do when I'm stamping. So it's kind of fun how this one tool can be so useful for different artists and crafters and the different techniques you can do with them. Now, these are the Ohuhu brush tip markers. They were released earlier this year. I used colors from the 72 set and the soon to be released skin tone set. Of course, use whatever you have. I did use the brush tips a lot for this unless I was just blocking in a color. You don't need to use brush tips. The nice thing about a brush tip marker is that you can vary the amount of ink that is being deposited at once, and you can get a greater range of tone from one marker. But it's certainly not necessary. You can use chisel tips. I would probably use a chisel tip more than a bullet tip if I had a bullet chisel marker. So just kind of keep that in mind. If you don't have the brush tip markers, you'll be doing a lot of the coloring with the chisel tip. Don't be afraid of using the chisel tip. Now, at this point, I was like, man, I'm losing the definition in the eye. I kind of feel like I need a little more guidance, a little more structure. So I'm going in with a fine liner, which is a permanent pen that you can go over with alcohol markers and it won't smear, and you can also go over it with watercolor and it won't smear. So it's a very handy pen to have. These ones are just about toast. I use them a lot for Inktober. These were the Art and Fly brand. Art and Fly makes a good brand. Biennial makes a really good one. Those are both budget priced ones, and then the creme de la creme would be the Micron, the official Micron, Sakura Micron, I believe, pens. And those are more pricey. I do think they last a smidgen longer now that I've actually taken the Art and Flies through their life cycle. I think I've been able to get a lot more mileage out of a Sakura Micron, but they're also twice the price. So you just kind of do whatever your budget fits. And honestly, I think I might have abused these Art and Fly ones a little bit because I did use them over some colored pencil, and I probably did muck up the nib a little bit. So take it with a grain of salt. I think they're all pretty equivalent. The Biennial ones that I have that I got earlier this spring and I've used quite a bit are still going strong. So just take it for what it's worth. I think that, you know, they're all pretty comparable. Now I lost a lot of the white in the eye, and I went in with a white Prismacolor pencil just to kind of get that in there. And then while I was at it, I'm like, you know, I can muck around with markers for a long time and not really advance. So I'm going to go in with a white Prismacolor pencil and put in my brightest highlights, and that's what I did. So at this point I wasn't sure if I was going to make the background dark like the photo or if I was going to just leave it like this. So I'm just going in right now with the white, and you can see how wonderful white looks on tan paper. Isn't that fantastic? You can really make a well-rounded picture on tan paper, especially a portrait, without doing loads and loads and loads of work. So I thought that was really fun. So I'm going in with a white pencil and putting in my brightest highlights on the skin. I know I can blend into those more with other colored pencils, and actually I could go in and dissolve them with my alcohol markers. You just need to be careful when you do that, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the video when I do that a little bit more. But for right now, I'm layering up some blue in her eyes. I was having a real, because if you'll notice this, sometimes it looks like her eyes are looking down, like she's looking down at the ground, which I did not want that. I want her to be looking up in defiance, and that was really bugging me. And it's like when I sketched her eyes were looking up, and now her eyes are looking down. It's like a magic picture. It was driving me bananas. And so I'm like, what am I going to do? So I decided to take a break on the eyeballs for a bit because they were seriously frustrating me. And I decided to layer up some more tones on the skin. Now, colored pencils, especially Prismacolors, are semi-opaque. So, oh, by the way, what I'm doing right here is I've got some touch-up texture, which is a product by Brush and Pencil. If you oversaturate an area with colored pencil and you can't get any more stuff to stick, you can brush that on top, let it dry completely, and then go over it with more pencil. So that's what I did there, because I couldn't adjust the eyes anymore, and it was really driving me crazy. So that's what that little nail polishy looking bottle was. I'm still layering up some colors in the skin. I knew I wanted to use this color on her gown, her red Handmaids gown. It's I think it's mahogany red or raspberry. No, this one's raspberry, I think. And I also wanted to put some on the skin because that large gown is going to be reflecting on her skin, so I want to get that everywhere. I'm a big believer in recycling your colors when you're using color pencil or marker. I typically don't have too many colors, individual colors in a painting, because I keep layering and reusing the colors I've already got out. You can also make very good use of a limited palette this way. For instance, if you don't have a lot of markers, a great way to stretch your supplies is to get an inexpensive set of colored pencils, because you can layer those up. Even inexpensive, like drugstore, department store colored pencils will do the trick. My favorite's Prang, if you're going to get some cheap ones at you know, Walmart or whatever. But I'm really a big fan of Prismacolors for just your general pencils for mixed media work. I use them a lot. And you can use them for total colored pencil work too, obviously, but I really like them for mixed media. So now I'm seeing if I can go over those eyes with my pencils. It's been probably about 15 minutes or so. I also have the Brush and Pencil Titanium White. I thought I might mix that up to do some highlights, but I figured this has got a base of alcohol marker. It's not going to be the most longevity prone artwork, so I'm just going to go ahead and use, you know, a white pen when I'm done. But I had it there. I had good intentions. Good intentions, but laziness prevailed. I worked over 2 hours on this thing, so I was ready to be done by the end of it, although I did enjoy it. So I'm brightening up the eyes a little bit more. I've managed to get the eyes to look up a little bit more, but still it's not the look that I'm going for. So again, we're doing the upside down thing, because you'll see when I get frustrated and I hit a wall, I turn it upside down, because I just know that's the quickest way. If I don't have time or I don't want to take a break from my artwork, the best way to get a break is to turn it upside down, and I get a much better look. And you can see with this, this is kind of like a, I think it's called ochre, sienna ochre, or ochre something. It's kind of giving her face a raw look, which might be an effect you want, especially, gosh, in this show, man, oh man, the poor girl, she did have some raw days. So you could definitely get that look that way. I'm using a blue to cool down the shadows and darken the shadows that are kind of like brownish orangey here, because I've already used that blue in her eyes and I knew it's going to harmonize. And again, I like to recycle the colors. It's just a wonderful way to make everything have some harmony. I added some cream into the eyes just to get the bright white away. I didn't want, the brightest white is her hat and will be the reflected highlights in her eyes. I didn't want to have a super bright eyeball. your eyes are never really all white. They'll have other tints like pink or gray or yellow. So I wanted to get that in there. Now I'm using a very neutral brown to kind of lightly scumble over those shadows. I didn't burnish. The only thing I burnished, like put so much pencil down in that I couldn't really stick any more on top, was the eyes. Everything else is very softly colored. Like if you had arthritis, you would not have a hard time doing this technique. Because you're using very little pressure. I am holding close to the end of the pencil though, just for the sake of having control over the pencil, but I mean, I'm giving pressure as if I was holding at the end of the pencil, if that makes sense. I'm using a very light peach color. I believe this is called Deco Peach. I'm not sure if that's a current Prismacolor color or not, but it's a lovely highlight color on Caucasian skin. And I'm using that for some of the reflected highlights and to blend in some of the highlights that I had. Now you can go, this technique called, I'm using a really light touch here, but if you want to blend in and you don't have a colorless blender, you can choose a lighter shade of whatever you're blending or a transition shade of the two colors you're trying to blend and just color firmly over it, and it will kind of melt and smear the wax around so you get a smoother look. I think I ended up overworking the lips at the end. I wish I could have just stopped at like probably the step before this and just left it, but I did end up kind of layering and going over it and making it work. But sometimes I make a lot more work for myself just because I'm either enjoying the picture so much that I want to keep playing with it, or I just, you know, I don't trust myself. I don't trust where it is, and I don't want to take a break, and then I end up overdoing it and then bringing it back, and that happens too. So sometimes I just make a lot more work for myself than I need to, and I need to be aware of that. Either take a break or flip it upside down or take a photo of it and look at the photo, because that will help quite a bit. I decided that I wanted a black background. That's something I realized I really enjoyed when I did the Inktober challenge. I did portrait or pictures of hands every day for the month of October, and you can see the recap of that either on my Instagram page or on my blog. And I really loved having a black background. So I'm going in with a black marker, and I'm using the chisel edge, which I like to do that if I'm doing a solid color, and I'm just coloring in the background. I'll use the brush tip for getting around tricky edges, but I find that it's just a lot easier with the chisel end, and you know, it just saves wear and tear on the brush tip. Now I'm going over with one more layer so I get a nice uniform coverage, and I'm just trying to go in the opposite way of the first way I colored, just to make sure I get a nice, even, dark, opaque, flawless result. One thing I wanted to mention that is if you had any of your original sketch lines in the background, like it was just kind of messy, hairy construction lines, I would erase those before you try to do a solid color, because sometimes even the call erase lines will show through on a solid black background. I learned that the hard way. So I also decided to just adjust the coat a little bit, using shades of pinks, plums, and reds to just kind of get the tones that I wanted. It's really important that when you're working from a reference photo, you go by what's really there. A lot of times we think, well, that's a red cloak, it should be red. Well, you're going to see all sorts of different colors reflected, and how the light's hitting it, and how the texture of the fabric will affect how your highlights and your shadows look, and you just want to make sure that you respect that and pay attention to it. Now, this is that technique I was telling you about, going over your markers, going over your colored pencils with markers. Now, I want to preface this with the fact that I did not have really thick applications here. And now I also want to say that I am wiping off my marker on a scrap paper before I cap it. So if there is wax on the tip of that marker, I am wiping it off, and I'm not letting it dissolve into the fiber of the marker tip to clog it up and mess it up. So just kind of keep that in mind. You can use a clear blender to dissolve your colored pencils, but it might like muck up the nib eventually as all that wax kind of dissolves into your marker nib. So do it once in a while, scribble it off, you should be fine. I wouldn't make a huge habit of it, and I wouldn't do it with really expensive markers. I get a lot of freedom when I'm using the Ohuhu markers because they're very inexpensive compared to art markers. The brush tip deposits more ink, so it's just a little easier to get a smoother blend that way. But you can always use a chisel nib, and that pushes it a little bit harder, and the chisel nib is not as delicate, so you don't have to worry about as much damage or contamination if you use a chisel nib. So just be respectful of your supplies. I want you to know the consequences of doing that technique, and you can decide for yourself whether it's worth the risk or not. I am very lucky that I have an abundance of art supplies, so I'm not as worried, but that said, I don't want to ruin them. So, keep that in mind. So for the hair, the blonde hair is really a combination of browns, grays, yellows, not like yellows, but I mean like kind of ochres or very, very pale, neutrals. And you just want to layer them in a way where you get the deep shadows, but you also leave some highlights so you get the appearance of blonde hair. Here I am working back into the eye, trying to get the eyeballs staring upward, which I am kind of getting there. I also want to get that darker rim around the eyes because she has just gorgeous blue eyes, and I wanted to get that piercing quality there in her face. And I'm also kind of taking breaks from the eyes now and then because I had to rework them a couple times. And that's just kind of par for the course for me because I'm not that practiced with portraits. I'm kind of out of practice, but I really wanted to do this. After watching the finale last night, I was like, I've got to draw June. She's amazing. Because, man, she's just a brave girl. I love that character. And I'm just kind of fiddling around with my shadows a little bit more. Since I used black on the eyes, I decided I'm going to put some of that on the part in the lips and also under the bonnet, just so I get those really deep shadows. I also added some to the cloak because I wanted it to fade, kind of like emerge from the black on the right hand side there. And, you know, there's just a lot of just layering and fussing and just getting it how I want it, basically. I was really pleased with the way this came out. I noted, I can see this on the replay that I have the left eye, the shape of the top line of the left eye is wrong. And I actually do fix that with a white gel pen. I just kind of bring the lid down at a sharper angle, and then I let it dry and go over it with alcohol marker. So there's another way to fix something. And you know what? I didn't notice it until I took the photo for this after I was done. So I wanted to make a note of that now, because if you look at the photo and you say, it looked a little weird when she was doing it, but it turned out all right. That's what I did. I drew the angle in properly with a white gel pen after looking at it with a photo, because I was just eye blind. I was, portrait blind at that point. I couldn't tell. And then I was able to correct it because I could see it a lot more clearly. I'm using a medium warm gray colored pencil to desaturate the shadows and darken the shadows on the neck. This is going to also cool down the shadows, even though it's a warm gray, because the gray is a lot cooler than the tan that I have them there currently, and that cooler color is going to push it back. Now I'm blending that in with a warm gray 3 marker, and then I'm going to blend that out with a warm gray 1 marker. So even though these are warm grays, they're still cooler than the tan we had below, and it's going to give a pushing back into the distance and shadowy appearance. I'm also using that warm gray 1 to blend some of the shadows on the face that I had recently added, and just to kind of tone some stuff down. And there you have it. I'm really pleased with the way this turned out. I had so much fun drawing a character from my favorite TV show, and I hope you enjoyed it too. Please leave a thumbs up before you go. I hope you enjoyed this video. Until next time, blessed be the fruit.